Turkey has a population of 86 million people, divided almost perfectly down the middle by gender. In terms of basic health parity and life expectancy, women hold a clear advantage, living to an average of 80.7 years compared to 75.5 for men. Despite living longer, women experience a severe truncation in their expected lifespan within the formal labor market. This graphic shows data from the Turkish Statistical Institute regarding expected active working life. For men, the timeline extends to 39.7 years. For women, it halts at exactly 20.7 years. That creates a stark delta, nearly 19 missing years of formal economic participation per woman. This gap operates as a rigid structural feature of the economy, consistently defying standard demographic transition models. By tracking micro-level data across the female life cycle, we can map the exact points where those 19 years are extracted from the formal economy. These missing years act as the primary bottleneck artificially capping Turkey's macroeconomic potential. The chronological beginning of working life starts with the critical 15 to 24 age demographic. The first major leak in the economic pipeline appears in the NEET rate. NEET stands for Not in Education, Employment, or Training, which categorizes young adults completely disconnected from formal skill building and labor. This animated funnel charts the divergence. The baseline male NEET rate sits at 13.1%. The female NEET rate surges to 30.1%. For the young women who clear this initial filter and enter higher education, institutional segregation begins immediately. This distribution note maps the polarization in university degrees. Among graduates in education, health, and the arts, women account for 73.1%. In high-yield STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the concentration flips to a 65.8% male dominance. This early academic sorting actively channels women into sectors with historically lower wage ceilings and less institutional leverage. Before age 25, nearly a third of the potential female workforce is completely neutralized, and the remainder is structurally clustered away from the primary drivers of the economy. Beyond academic data, the micromechanics of daily life inside an adult household reveal the next filter. Time use statistics function as the hidden ledger of the macroeconomy. They track the unpaid hours that actively subsidize the formal workforce. This 24-hour clock face measures the daily time men dedicate to household and family care. It totals exactly 53 minutes. For women, the daily time spent on unpaid domestic labor expands to 4 hours and 35 minutes every single day. Translated into an annual scale, this constitutes a second completely unpaid full-time job. This micro-level time sink connects directly to formal labor force exclusion in the national survey data. This bar chart categorizes the specific reasons individuals remain outside the formal labor market. 35% of women cite household duties as their primary barrier. For men, household duties registers at exactly 0.0% as a reason for workforce absence. Unpaid domestic labor is the quantifiable gravity well extracting those 19 years away from formal economic participation. Moving into the prime earning years of ages 25 to 49, the demographics face a specific stress test, the presence of a child under the age of 3. This chart tracks employment rates. The baseline employment level for women living in a household without young children sits at 58.6%. Once a child under 3 is introduced into the household, female employment plummets to 26.9%. For men in the exact same household situation, the employment rate remains stable at 90.9%. This 31.7 percentage point collapse is defined mathematically as the motherhood penalty. The standard policy assumption is that achieving a higher education protects women from this structural dropout. The national gender wage gap data tests that exact premise. This horizontal bar chart segments the gender wage gap by education level. For primary school graduates, the gap sits at 13.2%. For higher education graduates, the wage penalty does not shrink. It actually widens to 17.4%. This establishes a brutal economic logic. When a household calculates the high costs of childcare, the partner facing the 17% wage penalty is mathematically incentivized to leave their job. Education alone cannot override these mechanics. The compounding forces of the motherhood penalty and expanding wage disparities cement the 19-year deficit. Returning to our foundational timelines, 39.7 expected working years for men, and 20.7 for women. We can fill that 19-year void with the variables we mapped: the 30% NEET rate, 4.5 hours of unpaid labor, and the motherhood penalty. The ultimate consequence of this truncated timeline is a strict limitation on access to institutional decision-making power. At the peak of corporate influence, women hold only 18.3% of board seats in Turkey's top 50 publicly traded companies. At the legislative peak, female representation in the national parliament remains capped at 19.9%. In local and executive power, female mayoralties sit between 1 and 3%, and there is exactly one female minister in a cabinet of 17. Parity at the top of the institutional pyramid is mathematically impossible if the economic pipeline at the base is severed by 19 years. Standard policy solutions like building more universities or instituting top-down political quotas do not solve the underlying math. Full macroeconomic utilization requires dismantling the base layer economics of unequal time use and unpaid domestic labor. Until the invisible labor bottleneck is resolved, Turkey's demographic potential remains restricted, and half its intellectual and economic capacity is locked out of the timeline.